This particular book, Case Study Research, Theory, Methods, and Practice, is unique in one thing is its size. It's 450 pages, and the most popular book is about 120 pages long. And and that's Robert Yin's book. This book, my new book, Case Study Research, covers 14 different methods in quite a bit of detail. What I've tried to do is put in the nitty-gritty methods and doing research using case study methods, and covering both empirical positivistic methods as well as interpretive methods and brand new methods that most scholars have yet to use but have been proven in research to be very, very useful. The major criticism of case study research is that you are not able to generalize from the results, but there's been quite a bit of improvements that allow you to generalize results now, either through collecting more data on an individual case or collecting a few cases beyond the first focal case. And there's examples of using degrees of freedom analysis of actually testing alternative theories and generalizing to alternative theories to see which one theory applies. Just like a medical doctor examines you and looks at your symptoms and relates that to alternative diseases, you can actually do a similar approach using the same methodology. The other approach is to have a few cases and use what's called fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis. And there's a software program that enables you to actually build complex antecedent conditions in terms of formal statements using Boolean algebra. And it's become very popular among historical and sociology professors. And I think it's going to become very popular among marketing and management professors in this decade. What I think first comes to mind when people think about case study research is management cases that are used in the classroom to teach management strategy and marketing strategy issues and solutions. The case study research that we're talking about here is an extension of the initial work that was purely interpretive work, very, very useful work by such people as Margaret Mead in her Coming of Age in Samoa, as well as Paul Nutt in management studies, and a number of other people. But since that body of work, there's been several advances in doing case study research using additional methodologies. And this new book actually covers these new methodologies in quite a bit of depth that you can't find elsewhere. One of the advanced methods that is relatively simple to apply is advanced means-end laddering research. The prior methods would repeat the question of why and to get deeper meaning from subjects. But it turns out that the use of the question why makes people defensive and to protect their egos. So there's a better methodology, which is covered in the book, than the use of the question why to get from product attributes to basic needs or values of the subject. One of the other methods, as I mentioned a second ago, is degrees of freedom analysis, which was originally developed by Donald Campbell, a very well-known psychologist. But he didn't actually apply the method, he just described it. And the book actually has a long chapter on how to apply degrees of freedom analysis. Another method is fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis, developed particularly by Charles Rajan, who's at University of Chicago. And he has quite a following in fact, there's a society called COMPASS, COMPASS, which is an organization devoted to doing fuzzy set QCA. And that makes assumptions that are different from correlation analysis. Instead of using matrix algebra to analyze relationships, you use Boolean algebra to analyze relationships, which does not assume that high values on, say, an X variable are associated with a Y, high values on Y, on a Y variable or a dependent variable, and low values on X are associated with low values on Y. It simply makes the assumption that high values on X are associated with high values on Y, but says nothing about low values of X, whether or not it's associated with low values or high values on Y. The relationship is asymmetric instead of symmetric is the basic assumption. That's a big difference. It may not sound like much, but it's a big difference in analyzing data because most data tend to be asymmetric relationships. And there's a long chapter on how to use FSQCA, fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis, in the book, along with a description of the software program that was developed by Rajan and is being used now rather extensively in Europe, but there's been almost no studies in my field, marketing, using FSQCA other than the ones that I've done. The principal advantages of case study research include the development of and use of concepts in the participants' own words. Instead of forcing the participant to convert their thoughts and beliefs, their attitudes to a 7-point scale, you tend to stick with you do stick with the concepts and the classification methods that participants actually use. And that keeps you close to reality. The other important distinction of case study research is typically long periods of data collection in the field in natural settings. Herbert Simon, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, made the point that that any decision process is made up of two main elements: the decision maker and the context. And he uses an analogy that's become quite famous of a scissors. One arm of the scissors, or one part of the scissors, is the individual. The other part is the context. And contrary to some reports that he never actually looked at context, in an extremely important paper in 1956 in the Journal of Business, he actually presents a long interpretive study of a company making a decision of adopting a computer. In 1956, all the computers were gigantic mainframes. So this company was going to adopt their first computer, and he and his two colleagues, Sykes and Trow, actually spent long periods of time observing and interviewing people over 18 months in the company. And the company hired two consulting firms and to help them make the decision. And in the end, they became so confused and it became so complex for them that they backed out of the decision altogether. All this is reported in this article. And in the article, he develops the core principles of his theory relating to the satisficing principle, that decision makers don't seek optimal decisions, they seek decisions that they can live with. And so a big advantage of case study research is collecting contextual data that you typically don't collect using the dominant logic that most management marketing scholars follow, which is this use of 7-point scales and really forcing respondents to convert their thoughts into the terms of the researcher. Case study research doesn't do that. One organization that focuses on case study research is COMPASS, the one I just mentioned a few minutes ago, COMPASS. And that's a European-based organization. If you do a Google search, you'll find it, and you'll find about 150 articles, all case study research, all using FSQCA, methodology. Again, that's fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis. Another group related to the field of business studies, management studies, is IMP group. That's Industrial Marketing and Purchasing Group. And that's an organization that meets every September, and they study particularly the relationships between firms. And there's a number of other organizations that have interest in case study research, such as Association for Consumer Research. And there's an organization called CCT, that's the Consumer Culture Theory Organization. So again, it's CCT. That's sort of a breakaway group from ACR, the Association for Consumer Research. CCT is particularly focused on case study research related to consumer behavior and consumer culture. Case study research is not the dominant logic. There is a dominant logic in the study of management behavior and consumer behavior, for example. And that logic goes by the name empirical positivism, where you use statistical methods based on correlation analysis, which is the basis for multiple regression analysis as well as structural equation modeling. The difficulty that case study researchers have with this is the assumption of symmetrical relationships and the fact that the researcher forces the respondents to use 7-point scales or 5-point scales, and also the reliance on self-reports by the respondents. The evidence is pretty strong that most thinking is done unconsciously, yet the dominant logic approach relies on self-reports and does not use other methods such as document analysis and observation methods. Case study researchers usually are involved in collecting data from multiple sources, and it's sometimes referred to as triangulation, of using 3 different methods in the same study to confirm, support, and deepen information related to the process that they are studying. So I hope that answers your question. The Harvard business cases are management learning cases. They're not, but they're useful for reporting what companies did. It's a branch of case study research, but it's not typically what you find in scientific journal articles, behavioral science articles on case studies. But it's an important learning method when coupled with theory as well as skill building. And but it's not a topic that is covered in my new book. My new book focuses on building theory and testing theory related to human processes, particularly in the fields of management and marketing. Case study research from a science point of view is different from case study research from a management strategy point of view. Even though case study research sometimes studies strategy in terms of implemented strategy as well as planned strategy. One of the leading case study researchers is Henry Mintzberg. He's a professor at McGill University in Montreal. And he is one article he's particularly noted for, his 1976 article in Administrative Science Quarterly on the structure of unstructured decisions. Isn't that a lovely title? The structure of unstructured decisions. And he points out, for example, that there's feedback loops in thinking, and the problem definition changes as you go through the process. Well, and Herbert Simon points out the same thing in his, for example, in his Nobel Prize-winning essay in 1998. I'm sorry, 1998. So there you go.